Hello and welcome to the Truth About Cars podcast. I am Tim Healy, the managing editor, and this week we have Julie Giese, the president of the Chicago Street Race, on to talk about the second iteration of NASCAR's Chicago Street Race. Speaking of NASCAR, TTAC contributor Matthew Guy stops by to discuss the stuff we use and the NASCAR All-Star Race. But first, eBay Motors is here for the ride. With some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it with eBay Guaranteed Fit. It's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only and exclusions apply. How will NASCAR change in Chicago for year two? Why was there a fight in NASCAR this week? And what oil filter wrench should you buy? We'll discuss this and more on the Truth About Cars podcast. Here in the Truth About Cars, we like to talk about the stuff that we use in our own homes to keep our cars running and all that sort of stuff. So we'll be talking about oil filter wrenches with Matthew Guy in just a second. But before we do that, eBay Motors is here for the ride with the parts you need at the prices you want. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, they're guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. So again, we're talking about the stuff we use, and today we're talking about oil filter wrenches. Matthew, how are you doing today?
Hey, great, Tim. How about you?
I'm doing well, and this is from Matthew Guy, our TTAC contributor and someone who does a lot of wrenching on his own cars. In fact, he was just wrenching on his own car before we even came on to record today. So I don't know what work you were doing. Were you working with oil at all?
I was working. Yes, actually, I decided to do an oil change. I was doing something else as well. With brakes, we'll talk about that in a few weeks. But with the, I decided to do an oil change while I was under there and try out, this new oil filter wrench that I have. So there's a whole bunch of them out there, different styles, different kinds, and I thought we could talk about them today. So might be able to help our listeners make a good decision when they're out there shopping.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, before you get into any specific brands that you would or would not recommend, is there a particular style that works? Honestly, I haven't worked with an oil filter wrench in like 20 years. Does it even matter? You know, is the style adjustable towards the type of filter and the type of car, or is it kind of all one is the same?
So there's two main different types. There's one that's called a strap type, and you can pretty much picture that in your head, right?
I was about to say I can picture it in my head. I'm doing that right now. Yep.
Exactly. And it's just a strap. It might be a metal strap or it might be a rubber strap that goes around your oil filter. And then that is attached to a handle. And as you crank on the handle to unscrew your oil filter that's on your car, that strap tightens up, tightens around the oil filter. And there's usually some sort of either grip or rough surface on the inside of that strap, just to give you a little bit of extra pulling power. And then you just use the handle to rotate your oil filter off of the car. That's the type I like. I like those, but there's another one as well that I'm not holding here in my hand today, but I do think our readers should know about if they're not changing their car very often. If they've got the same car for a while, that's not a bad idea. They're plastic, and they are the exact size of the oil filter, of the bottom of the oil filter. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And they've got usually a 3/8 ratchet square on the bottom of it, so that way you can put this wrench on the bottom of your filter. Probably you're going to need an extension or two, and then you can use your ratchet as your turning tool. You know what I'm saying? To get that oil filter off. And that one's great if you've got the same car all the time, right? Because that way that your oil filter wrench only fits that oil filter. A lot of the filters, they'll range between like 2 9/16 up to about 3 1/8 is generally where they are, right?
Yeah.
So,
can you mention real quick? We had a bit of a glitch here. I don't know if it cut out on your end, but can you just restate the ratchet part for our listeners? Just once again, the ever popular technical difficulties. So can you just kind of restate that part?
No, for sure, man. With the ratchet, that you can use with the, I suppose they're called a cup style, and what you do is they're just like they're just a cup, and they fit onto the end of your oil filter, and they've got just probably a 3/8 square on them for your ratchet wrench. that will come with your socket set. And so you put the cup onto the bottom of your oil filter. Probably will need a couple of extensions just so that you can, for convenience, reach down and move your socket a little bit more. And then you can crank on that sucker with your ratchet. And those types of cup-style oil filter wrenches are great if you're only ever working on the same type of car all the time, right? If you're only ever going to work on a Challenger, hey, that's cool, right? Use that because you're only ever going to use it on that particular car. But I do like the strap type ones, and Tim, you might remember some of those from your parts days, yeah, like those strap type oil wrenches. You can think what I'm talking about in your mind.
Yeah, I've actually never really. Probably an auto shop in high school. Probably the last time I changed any oil on myself. When I was in the shop world, I was on the front end. I was the guy who greeted you at the desk. I was wearing khakis and a nice polo, so I was not changing oil. But I certainly remember seeing them. Yeah,
absolutely.
Especially since at a dealership, you work at a dealership, you have different cars coming through now. So now they're mostly from the same brand, although you have some used cars and that sort of thing. But 80% are from the same brand, but they're not all the same model. And the engines are, of course, laid out differently across the brand. Front-wheel drive versus rear-wheel drive, transverse versus horizontal, all that. So, yeah, I definitely remember seeing those more than the exact ones, because even with a dealership representing a particular brand or two, there were going to be used cars. There were going to be variations among different model years and different types of models. So I think the strap was probably what most technicians were using.
And I think that makes a lot of sense because there's so much variation. The one I'm holding here that I was using earlier today is actually branded by Pennzoil. Go figure, right? Certainly Pennzoil didn't make this. They just licensed their name for it. But it has a metal strap on it. And then as you turn it in the appropriate direction, it just tightens down on the oil filter. Pretty easy, pretty simple in terms of its operation. But there's two big things about this. Number one, this is all metal. There's no plastic in this at all. Even on the handle. The handle is plastic. The handle is metal. And the other big thing is that you can take the handle and you can rotate it 90 degrees. And that's something for anyone who's worked in tight spaces, anyone who's been working, snaking their arm up under the car, right, to find that oil filter, which is always above a cross member. Or, here's the fun one, it's above the exhaust, right?
And you don't want to get burned.
Well, you get burned, and then as soon as you slack off the oil filter, what happens? Oil goes all over the exhaust and it smells forever.
Yeah, and it also burns. Yeah,
it also burns, exactly. But the thing that I really like about this Pennzoil one is that the handle does rotate 90 degrees. So that way I can just have the oil filter wrench up there on the oil filter, and I still got enough torque on it. I still got enough handle here in order to rotate it around and get that sucker off the engine. So, because they can get on, I mean, you don't put them on too tightly, but they do tend to stick on there pretty good, especially if you've bumped up against the outer limits of your oil change intervals, for sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I do like this. I know that it's Pennzoil branded. It just goes from anything from just under 3 inches to about 3 1/8. For anyone who's listening from Canada, 65 millimeter to about 80 millimeter, I guess.
That's another. Just as an aside, it's weird how here in the States we get both millimeter and imperial. It's confusing. Anyway, carry on.
You can speak of Roman Catholic or not, right? And
yeah, exactly.
One thing I noticed on the packaging is the word I'm looking for this Pennzoil wrench, is that on the back of it there is a paper ruler. And it says, to determine the proper oil filter wrench for the size of your filter, place your filter on this ruler starting at the dotted line. So the diameter of your filter will tell you if this is the right wrench or not. And it encompasses, I would say, 99% of anything I've ever used. But that's not something I've ever seen before. And I think it's cool that some of these makers of generic parts and generic wrenches and things like that are usable on any vehicle are being a bit more inclusive and putting tools like this on the back of their packaging. I like it. This is kind of this is a really neat thing that I hadn't seen before. Something simple, but it makes life a lot easier so you don't get home and you're like, this didn't fit after all. And then you're up under the car and you've lost your oil filter for the third time because you had to go back to the shop, et cetera, right?
Right.
And just as a tip for any of our listeners who are just getting into this, if you do have a oil filter wrench that is a rubber strap, and those are really, really common. You often pick those up in some discount stores and things like that. That's why, try to get something from a parts store if you can. But some of the discount stores, the rubber that I have encountered on those oil filter wrenches has been, if any oil gets on it at all, which it probably will, or road grime, anything making that surface slippery, I found that it was really, really difficult to get that initial bite in order to twist off the oil filter. And it would be super frustrating because your oil filter wrench would just spin around the filter without actually moving.
No, that's no good.
Right, no, that's no good. So what I did was, this was years and years ago, is I got a strip of sandpaper. I was doing body work somewhere on something, and I just got a strip of sandpaper, and I stapled it to the inside of that rubber oil filter wrench, right? Just into the inside of that rubber strap on the oil filter wrench. And that reliably produced enough grip just to twist it off, just enough torque to get that oil filter off. So I'm a fan of modifying your tools if you need to, and being able to do that with just a little strip of regular sandpaper. It wasn't anything crazy. It wasn't like, some outrageous grit or anything like that. It was just normal body work sandpaper, and it was enough so that I could get a grip onto the oil filter. And Robert is your father's uncle. Bob's your uncle, right? And and that way you could have a lot more success instead of a lot more frustration. But I'm digging this one from Pennzoil. It's all metal. It's the size I need for the cars plural that I'm working on, and it has that 90-degree rotation on the handle. So big fan here of this Pennzoil branded oil filter wrench.
So you'll be rooting for Pennzoil cars in the upcoming races too, I'm sure. No, I'm kidding.
Who's that Joey Logano these days, isn't it?
Yeah, and I forget who it was in IndyCar, but he qualified really well the other day. I forget his name. But anyway.
Right. Yes, that's correct. Yeah. That's correct.
Yeah, anyway, is there any brand you've had a bad experience with or you would steer people away from? I mean, it seems like these are inexpensive tools.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't complicated, straightforward, but I would imagine for all the reasons you just went over with us, I would imagine there are some you're like, oh, these just don't work as well.
Stuff from the discount stores almost every single time.
I agree that you say that every time, but it makes sense. Yes.
Yeah. It's stuff from the discount stores because it's not generally a particular brand that I'm trying to stay away from. It's just wherever they come from. And I mean, this one here, it says right on the package, made in China. So I mean, it's not anything that's I don't know of different quality from that same country or anything like that, or wherever those discount stores are getting their supply from. But this particular one was very hefty, very hefty, and it is, I don't know, it's just heavier. Mm-hmm. And sometimes if tools are heavier, they work a little bit better. The only caveat for that are some box end wrenches that we'll probably talk about one week going forward. They're really, really thin from a company called Ulsa Tools. Super light, super thin, and they are absolutely fantastic for getting in really small places. So I think if any of our listeners are looking for some of these oil filter wrenches, get one from an actual parts store or from somewhere like eBay Motors, where people are selling things that are from companies like Pennzoil, and something that is some really, really good quality. And this one, I like it. It's all metal, even the handle. So, big fan.
Yeah, I can hear you tapping on it.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we should know before we wrap the segment? I mean, anything that someone who's new to doing oil changes, I know I ask you this every single time, and a lot of our listeners who are familiar with wrenching in their cars are probably kind of rolling their eyes. But there's always somebody new, whether it's a young driver who's doing work for themselves for the first time, or somebody like me who maybe hasn't been able to do a lot of the work themselves. They're a little bit older, but then they move out of the city to the suburbs and all of a sudden decide to save some money because now they have a garage where they can work on stuff themselves, which I cannot do where I currently live. So there are people who just said, hey, you know what? For the last 20, 25, 30 years, I've been paying for too much for this stuff. Now I'm in my 40s, 50s, 60s, want to save some money and want to do things themselves. So that being said, is there anything that people should know beyond the basic safety stuff, like don't get yourself burned, make sure the oil pan is in place so the oil doesn't get everywhere, all that sort of stuff? Hopefully people would know or figure out. But specific to the oil filter wrenches? Anything we haven't already talked about that people should know?
I think that making sure you buy the right, nothing more frustrating than when you get home with the wrong size wrench for whatever project you're working on. So whilst if you're buying this in person somewhere, pick up the wrench that you want, that you're looking for, and then dart down to the part of the store that sells the actual oil filters. And in every parts store I've ever been, and you too, Tim, there'll either be a book or these days a little iPad, little tablet there that you can look through and you can find your oil filter for the car that you're working on. Find that oil filter, take it out of the box, and just make sure it fits the wrench that you're holding in your hand that you're about to buy. So that way you know before you even leave the store that you've got that proper sized wrench before you go back and crawl under your car that is probably 20 minutes away from the store that you're standing in at the moment, right?
Right.
If you're right, and if you're really thinking ahead, I mean, bring the oil filter with you. If you're really thinking ahead, the one that you've already purchased somewhere else maybe. But I like doing that, just starting down to the oil filter section, making sure with the size comparison that I've got the correct wrench in my hand, and makes life a lot easier. Takes you an extra 5 minutes, but it saves you an hour.
Yeah, I think more people should keep that advice in mind when buying anything, whether it's car repair or home repair. I don't know. I'm not going to get into specifics because we don't have time, but I don't know how many times I've been doing what should be a simple repair at my condo and I've had to go into Home Depot 5 or 6 times. And sometimes it's not my fault. Sometimes you can't really figure it out to get home. But sometimes spending 2 minutes in the store talking to an employee or looking at a sizing guide in the aisle would have saved me a trip. So it applies to oil filters and oil filter wrenches just as much, I would think.
I should take my own advice because I've been in the same boat, and that's why I'm trying to dispense the advice now. I just got to remember it, Tim. That's all.
Yeah, that's what happens to me too. It's one thing to say, it's one thing to know what you're supposed to do. It's another thing to actually do it. And with that, absolutely for sure. And with that, we'll wrap up our Stuff We Use segment here on the Truth About Cars podcast. eBay Motors is here for the ride. What do you remember about a car that you love the most? I know what I remember, and that's when I had my Fox body Mustang. That car was far from perfect. It had some rust. It started jumping out of first gear after a while. It needed a lot of work. I didn't have money or time to put into it, although the engine was bulletproof because those 4 to 5 liters often were. But I loved driving that car. It was so much fun, especially when it was running well. So that car meant a lot to me, even though it's long gone, and I don't know what happened to it after the person bought it for me. I don't know if he kept it running or not. But if I did have the time back then to have fixed it up, and if eBay Motors had existed back then, I would definitely have been using eBay Motors to keep it running, because with over 122 million parts, you can make sure that your number one ride or die stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only and exclusions apply. Today in the Truth About Cars podcast, we have Julie Giese, the president of the Chicago Street Race for the NASCAR race that'll be in Chicago in July, talking with us about what they learned last year, the challenges going forward, and how to set up this year's race. So, Julie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent, excellent. So, first of all, let's run through last year's race, and let's kind of talk about how it went overall and what you learned from it, and we'll get into more specifics in a few minutes. But can you just give me the high-level overview first?
Absolutely. So the 2023 NASCAR Chicago Street Race was actually the very first street race in NASCAR's history, and it was the first for the city of Chicago as well. And running an event in downtown Chicago, very unique, right around Grant Park and next to Lake Michigan, was just a tremendous experience for us. Several years of planning and preparation, and anytime that you do an event outside, you are at the mercy of the weather. And unfortunately, we had some record rainfall for the weekend. I believe just over 9 inches of rain.
I was there. I covered the race. I remember.
Yeah. So, but even despite that, I mean, it was a tremendous success. I think for us, it was an opportunity to introduce NASCAR to a whole new audience, but also an opportunity to showcase the city of Chicago through this amazing broadcast with our television partners, and then really just drive tourism to this city that's continuing to bounce back from the pandemic. So really good weekend, $109 million of economic impact, and great TV ratings overall, competitive race. We had our first-time race winner was Shane Van Gisbergen, who was running his very first NASCAR race, which is another great story.
Yeah, and I will say the race, I covered it, and so when you're covering a race, as you probably know, you can't see much of it at any one given time. So I went ahead and rewatched the broadcast on Peacock a day or two later, and it really did shine on TV.
It really did, and I think, even again with the challenging weather, when the rain stopped and everything cleared up, and we were able to get the race started on Sunday evening, the sunset around the skyline was absolutely spectacular. I mean, the city was definitely showing off a little bit in the best way possible, just with that skyline and right along the lake, and the footprint. You can't ask for a more amazing, beautiful location to be racing in, right around Grant Park, Chicago's front yard, and you've got the lake and the fountain, and it's spectacular.
Yeah, so that's a huge thing for Chicago. I have to ask, what were the challenges? So as you put this race together, there were a lot of people who were really skeptical, and I read a lot of pieces, saw stuff on social media. Yeah, and I'm a lifelong Chicagoan, with the exception of a brief detour for an academic year in Michigan. I've lived either in the city or the suburbs my entire life. I know what it's like to see downtown shut down several times a year for the Taste of Chicago, Lollapalooza for the past 15, 20 years, all the different street festivals that happen between Memorial Day and Labor Day, typically, down to the marathon, even Shamrock Shuffle and 5Ks, stuff like that. So I'm sure there were some people pushing back saying, oh my gosh, we're going to lose another weekend of everything being shut down. I heard that addressed on sports talk radio locally. I even heard some kind of wild stuff like, oh my God, the paintings are going to get vibrated to death in the Art Institute. So you had all these different stakeholders. You had residents downtown, office workers, the city, the park district, everyone you had to deal with. How'd you deal with putting that together, that whole process?
Well, and I think you said it best. I mean, this is a city that is very well versed on putting on big events. And I think first and foremost, being able to work alongside all the various city agencies to bring this event to life was incredibly beneficial for us. They have a tremendous amount of knowledge on how to host these events and do it in a successful way in downtown. And so we definitely leaned on them from a planning perspective. But you think about like the questions and the conversations that we had. As I mentioned earlier, this is about bringing NASCAR to a new audience. And so it was really just this unknown. It had never been done before. How is it going to work? How do I get around the city? What does it look like? What does it sound like? And it's just the unknown. And I think, those were really what those conversations, we spent a lot of time answering questions and just, hearing from residents and businesses and doing whatever we can to minimize disruptions. We understand what we're doing is unprecedented and that it is, we are in not only downtown, but we have thousands of people who live and work in downtown. And so, wanted to be good neighbors to each of them. And really, I think for us, it was just about having as many conversations as possible and sitting down, answering questions, educating them on what to expect. And, everything from, again, I mentioned the sound, but also just the safety precautions that are put in place whenever you do set up a street race in a downtown environment, whether it's the concrete barriers and the fencing, the perimeter fencing, and helping everyone understand what that looks like as well. So I think the more conversations we had, the opportunity we had then to answer those questions, it really, I think, helped everyone start to get a general sense and understanding of what we were going to be doing. And it's been really fun looking ahead here to this year's race. Like a lot of those questions have, I don't get them anymore. Or if someone asks, there's someone else in the room that's immediately jumping in and answering before I get the chance, because now the city has seen it, whether they attended in person or if they tuned in on television to watch it, and they have a good understanding of what the event was. And the common theme has been that wasn't nearly as bad as I thought. I could get around. I knew how to get around. And then watching the broadcast, as you said earlier, like the city looked absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, and I'm not just saying this because you're our guest, but I definitely had that same. I had a little bit of skepticism too, and even though I'm a racing fan or a casual racing fan, so some of the stuff I thought was a little bit wild. I knew the paintings weren't going to vibrate in the Art Institute, especially since the Art Institute was pretty far from any parts of the track where they were moving at high speed. But some of the stuff did make sense. Getting around was definitely a concern that I had, especially driving down Lakeshore Drive, which you really couldn't do to go from the north side to the south side. So stuff like that. But obviously for me, I didn't have to deal with any of that because I actually went to the race weekend to cover it. I think I was there, all 3 days. I think I was there I interviewed some drivers on Friday, came down briefly on Saturday, and was definitely there for the Cup race on Sunday. I live on the north side, and I used Uber and the Red Line, and both seemed to work out fairly well. The only time I really had an issue was leaving the Cup race, even after doing all the media responsibilities, which most of the fans had cleared out by then. It was still a little tricky to get an Uber, but otherwise I thought it was, I didn't have to walk super far to get an Uber. I didn't have to walk super far to the Red Line. The Red Line was accessible. So it wasn't, I remember on Friday, the practice walking over, or maybe it was Saturday, walking over and thinking, it's not even that loud until you get really close to the track. So I feel like it actually went off pretty well. I don't think the sound was really going to disturb people, and I don't think getting around was that difficult. I would imagine maybe if you had to use Lakeshore Drive, going around would be a little bit of a pain. But count me in that number of people who thought this could end up being a problem, and ended up working out pretty well.
Yeah, that's been the general consensus. And even when you talk about the sound, race morning or the first morning that we had practice, I was getting text messages from residents that were nearby that we had talked with a lot, and that, the general consensus was, is this as loud as it gets? This is great. And so I think, again, until you experience it for the first time, those questions are all completely understandable. And again, everyone felt like, okay, yeah, now I have a good understanding. Obviously for us, continuing to tweak and be as diligent as possible on reducing timeframes on setup and tear down and minimizing those disruptions is important. And that's something that we've continued to do. And we learned a lot last year.
Yeah, the noise struck me about as loud as Lollapalooza. So if like Lollapalooza, you can hear, if you're in the South Loop, you can maybe hear the concerts and maybe hear what song it is. And I thought it was about the same for, obviously you can't tell which car is driving, but I thought the noise level was about the same from Michigan Avenue or from the areas where there actually are residences and offices. So that brings me to my next question. You've talked about how we feel, or how a lot of people feel, it went off better than expected, all that. But what are the specifics that you're doing differently? And obviously you can't control the weather, and there's only so much you can do about that, although that's part of it too. What did you learn from managing that? But what did you learn from this first race? We could do this better. We should change this. We have to change this to make it better for the fans, make it better for the drivers, the locals. Anything specific that's going to be changed that we should be on the lookout for this coming year?
Yeah, I think for us, really, the event experience itself is going to be somewhat consistent. The course will stay the same, the 2.2 mile, 12-turn course. The drivers liked it. It was a competitive track, so we're not going to change that. We've made some small adjustments to some different viewing structures just based on feedback and more people wanting more reserved seats, small tweaks like that. I think, honestly, the biggest change for us is really specific to the build and tear down. I talked about wanting to be as diligent as possible, minimizing that schedule. We're able to take 6 days off of the full build and tear down schedule. So we're about 5 weeks start to finish from the moment that we first start putting up the viewing structures to the moment that we are leaving Grant Park. And so that's been really important to us. And I think the other thing is two things. One, all based on feedback from locals, is one, they want to be able to bring the family to the event and making it affordable, more affordable for them to bring the kiddos. And so Saturday we've introduced youth pricing. So kids 12 and under are free on Saturday, $45 for the entire weekend. And then the other piece was entertainment, and weaving Chicago into that. That's something that we've said from the overall event experience. We want this to be very authentic Chicago. Chicago has amazing street festivals every weekend of the summertime, and so we wanted to make sure that we were a part of that. And you saw that in the food and beverages and things throughout the footprint. This year, we're including that in the entertainment side of it as well, having Chicago house music showcase with a number of different house music locals here. It's the 40th anniversary of Chicago house music. So excited to have them. We've got one more concert talent that we're going to be announcing here in the next month that is very much ingrained in Chicago. And so just continuing to be thoughtful about that and integrate and weave in Chicago, and whether it's entertainment or vendors, food and beverages, et cetera, throughout the entire footprint.
Yeah, I would say anecdotally that the things that I heard from friends of mine, particularly friends who were interested in checking out NASCAR but are not really car people, or racing fans, the three things that I heard from people who attended or wanted to attend was pricing was an issue, especially those who only wanted to go for one day. They wanted to be a little more affordable. I also heard some talk about more pedestrian bridges or wider pedestrian bridges. There was some human traffic jams going back and forth at times. And then I experienced that myself just covering the race, going from corner to corner. And then there was a few concerns about not getting information quickly enough during the rain delays about when the race might restart or when lightning was rolling through, that sort of thing. Have you been able to address those things? I know you already mentioned affordability. Have you heard those same things, and have you been able to address this?
Absolutely. I think on the ticketing piece, in addition to the youth pricing, we do have single day tickets available this year from a general admission as well as premium hospitality perspective. From a bridge, absolutely, we saw that last year. The Turn 12 bridge was utilized both by our competition industry as well as attendees. So we now have a separate bridge. So we've added a bridge over there that is exclusive to the competition. And then we've added another bridge to that Turn 12 area, as well as in that area between turns 1 and 2 to get down into the concert field. So we've definitely, that was something that we saw and heard as well and have been able to address. And then from a communication perspective, absolutely. I think we learned a lot last year just on the process and and what we're able to do. I think that that was one thing that, we knew we were going to learn, because this wasn't like our typical racetrack. We know how the drying goes. Like this past weekend in Kansas, we experienced some weather. We knew, it was going to take X amount of time to dry the track and get ready. This was, again, city streets and a very different environment for us. So we were able to learn a lot on what that timeline looks like, what's needed, and then ultimately create a very detailed communication plan, both internally for industry stakeholders, but then externally for everyone attending the event.
Cool, excellent. So we've already touched a lot about some of the specifics to Chicago, some of the challenges, but anything we didn't already touch on? I don't want to hamper the theme too much, but it's something that's really fascinating to me. Are there any other challenges, especially with this being NASCAR's first street race ever? Other challenges that you went through last year that, we've already talked about certain things like the sound and all that sort of stuff, so we don't want to go too crazy here. And there's some obvious stuff like shutting down streets, but were there other challenges that maybe you didn't anticipate or that you had to deal with that just kind of came up as things went along? Can you tell me about any of those?
Nothing sticks out specifically. I think one of the things, just from an industry perspective, when you think about how unique this was for our industry as well, they are very used to going to a fixed venue, and a lot of those venues we've been going to for a long time. They have their hotel and the usual places where they eat, and this obviously not only being a new market, but a very different experience. In our other markets, you're staying at a hotel, have a rental car, driving to the track. Here, really, most of our race teams, if not all of them, stayed at a hotel very close by. All the team members just walked over to the course, same with our drivers. And that's unique and different. And I think for them, helping them understand what that looks like, what the movements are, very different again from what they were used to. So we spent a lot of time with the industry and helping them understand path of travel to what the experience is like in the garage area. Of course, we don't have permanent garages. They're working under tents along Columbus Drive. So really, I think this was not only a unique experience for the city of Chicago, but also, again, for our industry coming into this environment. And I'll tell you, they absolutely loved it. I think they will all tell you they just weren't sure what to expect because, again, we've never done this before. Same thing we heard from residents. And when our industry got here, this community was so incredibly welcoming, from all the branding and signage that have been put up to the different marquees that different businesses put up saying, welcome NASCAR fans. And I heard from so many people that every time they went to a restaurant or walked into their hotel and they ran into new people, they were like, oh, are you here for NASCAR? We're so excited that NASCAR's here. So that positive energy and that vibe. And I really, the week leading into the race weekend, there was this tangible energy and excitement in the city, which was a lot of fun. And it was really heartwarming for me, for our teams and industry to see that and feel that as well. And that's probably been their biggest takeaway, is just how much excitement there was. You could feel it in downtown that whole week leading into the weekend.
What other feedback have you gotten from drivers, teams, or even fans that we've not yet touched on?
I think I think for them, it's just continuing to evolve the experience. Obviously, it was disappointing for us to not be able to get all the concerts in. We really want this to be an music and racing experience. We got, I think, about 20 minutes of one of the concerts in. So, I think everyone's excited for the full experience this year. I think we all feel like we have a little bit of unfinished business. But overall, really very positive. I think, again, the competition, for NASCAR, the competition on the track is always a huge priority. We want a competitive event. We want drivers to feel like they can pass. And you look at what Shane Van Gisbergen did, I think, passing, I don't know how many cars in the last 10 laps to be able to work his way through the pack to take the lead and ultimately win the race. And so I think everyone really enjoyed the course. We really didn't get, I don't even know if we got any requests for changes to the course itself. So overall, really positive. I think, again, if we can just get that good weather and be able to deliver the rest of the experience, I think it's going to be an amazing weekend.
Yeah, for sure. Fans, I did interview a few fans for a story. I certainly talked to drivers both at their event, and I also ran to Daniel Suarez at a different media event later on in the fall and talked to him. And generally speaking, the feedback from drivers was positive, especially the walking from a hotel to downtown and being able to interact with the fans and also being pretty close to the track. And that was very, I think most of the drivers across the board really liked that. Can I ask you, or I'm going to ask you, what fans can expect this year outside of what we've already talked about? What else can fans expect? I mean, we talked about the pricing differences, and that's in the street festival atmosphere. Are there other things that weren't in place last year, or maybe things that were popular and will be coming back that fans who are attending can be looking forward to?
Well, I talked about the entertainment, and we've definitely added to that overall lineup, not just the 4 main concerts, but adding that house music showcase. We'll be adding one more entertainer. I think another thing that we're really focused on this year is the Butler Field experience, which is actually a free experience open to everybody. It's just on the north end of the footprint at the corner of Monroe and Columbus. And this is an area that we had some activations in last year, but really based on the feedback and just how people experience that area, we're really putting a focus on additional content in there, both from a Chicago perspective, again, leaning into that Chicago Street Festival experience with different vendors and food providers, but then also NASCAR education and NASCAR 101. Last year, 85% of our race attendees were at their very first NASCAR race, and so it's a tremendous opportunity for us to help them understand more about the sport, what they're about to see, but then also for people that are just curious and want to come down and be part of the event but may not have a ticket, having that NASCAR education. So we're going to have several new displays and programming in that Butler Field area this year, which we're really excited about. And then I think, as I mentioned, we've made a few tweaks to some of the viewing areas, but essentially most of the reserve seats and the locations are staying the same. We're working on some new fan experiences down in Lower Hutchinson Field, where the concert is, that we'll be announcing here in the coming weeks. So overall, again, I think we're just really pushing ourselves to continue to drive a very unique experience and deliver on that commitment that we've made, but also, again, try new things from a NASCAR race weekend perspective. This is not like every other NASCAR weekend. I mean, we're running in downtown Chicago, so think outside the box, be creative, and have some fun with what that programming looks like.
How do you anticipate this race coming off? I would assume you're probably going to say you think it'll be better than last year because you learned stuff, but how do you really anticipate this kind of all working out as we go through the second year?
Yeah, I think just based on what we've seen so far from a sales perspective, I think we're definitely anticipate growing this event and continuing the momentum that we had last year. I think even, we joke about the weather, but even in spite of the weather, it was a tremendous success. And I think being able to get the race in was such a good race. People had such a great time. And so I think we definitely want to continue to build on that. Our commitment to Chicago is to continue to drive tourism. So getting people to come in, attend the race, but then also, add a few more days to your trip to Chicago. There's so many amazing things to do in the city, from, food and cultural attractions to, just so many different things that you can see, and it's so walkable. And so we've really put a focus on that this year as we lead into the race, helping everyone who is traveling in understand all the different things you can do in Chicago, making sure that you're maximizing the experience. So I think, again, last year, great event. I think this year will be even better.
Yeah, and so I just have one final question for you, and then we'll also do a brief dive into your background, and then we'll wrap the segment. But I wanted to ask you, I know correlation and causation aren't the same thing. I know that Formula One going to Las Vegas is pretty much unrelated to Chicago, but that was F1 doing a street race, and they hadn't done one in the States. I think that was not their first one, but it had been a long time. The race in Miami is not really a street race, and the race in Austin is on a dedicated track. But so do you think IndyCar, which has done a lot of street races elsewhere, but not in Chicago, do you think IndyCar or F1 or other large racing series are learning anything from NASCAR if they wanted to come here to Chicago?
It's a great question, and probably one better for them to answer. I think, again, for us, being able to put together a world-class event in an amazing location, here in Chicago, and this isn't a small market, and to have everything come together and be able to showcase the city's a tremendous opportunity. And I think for me, if we pique the interest of a motorsports fan that, I want to go to Chicago and I want to see what the street race is about, or just a casual fan here in Chicago that, again, I've talked to so many people that came to the race because they were just curious, and they had never thought they'd go to a NASCAR race and never go to any kind of race, and they wanted to be part of it. I've learned the city is such a prideful city, and I love since I've moved here, you see the Chicago flag so many places, and I think that's the thing I continue to hear from locals who came to the event is how proud they were that it was here in Chicago and how great the city looked. And so I'm sure we learn from one another. That's definitely not something that isn't out of the ordinary. I think we study best practices across all of events, and I'd say not even racing. It's like big events, how they put on, whether it could be a tennis tournament or something that an NFL does, or a golf event. I think for me, I spent a lot of time looking at golf events, knowing what we were doing around Grant Park and how we can learn from that. So I think we all learn from one another, and it only makes us better.
Did you learn it all from the NFL draft, which was in the same spot just a few years earlier?
Absolutely. I think we learned a lot about just that process. And again, this is where working with the various city agencies who helped put on that event came with a really great base knowledge. Our production company that we use that's a partner with us on this event is their name is Four Leaf Productions. They were heavily involved in the NFL draft, so they had a really good baseline as well. That really, I felt like, gave us a jump start on all of the planning. They had that base knowledge of how to operate an event in the park and those relationships here in the city that really helped get us started.
Excellent. So I'm going to ask you as we wrap up here. I'm going to ask you to walk us through your background, which we normally do at the start of the segment, and I just sort of jumped into the questions. So my apologies. We'll do it at the end instead. I also did have one other question as well. I wanted to ask how the race came about and how this all started and why Chicago was the first one. So if you could kind of walk us through your background, then answer that question. Why Chicago and how it came about. That'd be excellent.
Sure, absolutely. So my background, I grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin, and I went to school actually for agriculture. I have an agriculture marketing degree, and during my time at college, I did an internship one summer and realized it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So started exploring different opportunities and different things that I wanted to do. I grew up a race fan. My dad watches the races, and I thought it would be really interesting to be in motorsports. So did a bunch of networking, sent resumes out to all of the racetracks around the country. I got a lot of rejection letters, did not get a job with any of them, but started working at an agency in Minneapolis on agriculture accounts. Absolutely loved it. Had a coworker there who had a friend, believe it or not, that worked at a racetrack in upstate New York, Watkins Glen International, and he called her out of the blue one day with an open position and asked if she knew of anyone that might be interested. And she knew I loved racing, and she made the connection. And I moved to upstate New York in January of 2001. So this is my 24th season with NASCAR. Been very lucky to have worked at a number of our facilities, Watkins Glen International, and then moved to Daytona International Speedway, where I spent 14 years on the marketing team before working on our construction side of the business as we renovated Phoenix Raceway. And then ultimately that led to the leadership role as president of Phoenix Raceway for 4 years prior to moving to Chicago about almost 2 years ago now.
Okay, great. Excellent.
Yeah, it's a fun little road. And actually, so how Chicago got started and how I ended up here in Chicago, during the pandemic, our drivers were racing virtually on their simulators as a way to continue to fill that TV time that we had scheduled for the actual race. It was called the iRacing Pro Invitational, and that led our team to get creative on some of the courses that they were running. We had a conversation, our leadership team had a conversation with the Chicago Sports Commission. They allowed us to come up to Chicago and scan the streets and create a virtual Chicago street race, which we actually had our drivers run in July of 2021. And it was really, it was broadcast on FS1. It was really meant to be just another unique course showcasing what our drivers can do virtually. And at the end of that event, both the city officials that we worked with, along with NASCAR leadership, kind of looked at each other and were like, this could actually work. Like, how do we make this happen? And that really jump-started the conversations and led us to where we are today, and having the Chicago Street Race happening here in downtown Chicago.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Again, we've been with, make sure I said this correctly, Julie Giese, the president of the Chicago Street Race. Julie, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome back to the Truth About Cars podcast. Here on our podcast every week, we talk about NASCAR and what's going on. Not so much race recaps, although we do talk about what happened on track, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But we also talk about rumors, what we think the series should do to improve, all sorts of stuff. This past week was the North Wilkesboro Speedway for the All-Star Race, and the race itself, not a lot going on. It's an exhibition race. No one wants to get too wrecked or too hurt in an exhibition race, just like stick and ball sports where teams maybe don't play defense or where hockey changes its format so that guys don't get hurt. Same thing in racing, right? Like they don't change the format, although there are fewer drivers on track. And I don't know the exact point scoring format. I do know let me try that again, not 100 million. 1 million was on the line for the winner, which is Joey Logano. The racing itself, from what I saw, for the most part, not super aggressive, except for one or two little incidents that became a big incident after the race. And so Matthew Guy, a TTAC contributor, and I will discuss that in just a moment. But for those who didn't see the race or who only saw part of it, early on in the race, first or second lap, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. goes for a pass in the middle between Kurt Busch and I believe it was Kurt Busch and a few other cars. And then Kurt thought he hit him, and Stenhouse said he didn't. Kurt hit the wall. And then next lap around, Kurt Busch, and Matthew, correct me, it was Kurt Busch, correct?
Yes, I mean, so
Not
who
his
was
brother
that there?
Kyle.
So there was Kyle Busch and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. The 8 and the 17. I'm sorry,
I
the
just
8
wanted to
and
make sure I
47.
had the right brothers. So Kurt comes in, and I get him confused all the time. I could be looking at an interview with his name on the graphic, and I'll still forget. So
okay.
Yeah, so Kurt Busch goes ahead and hits Stenhouse, spins him out. Stenhouse gets angry. Now, a lot of tracks you can leave early if you're knocked out of the race. North Wilkesboro, no tunnel. Stenhouse is stuck there. Changes into street clothes, and he's waiting for Busch in the pit area after the race. So I'm watching the race. It got kind of boring because Logano was dominating, and there was a battle for second or third, but it's an all-star race, so you're really thinking, I just want to see some good racing. There's no points on the line, whatever. So it's just $1 million for the winner, which is not chump change, but these drivers do get paid pretty well. So then you're thinking, okay, well, Logano's going to win, and it's like another all-star event in other sports. You kind of keep one eye on it. So I'm watching the final post-race stuff and seeing Logano being interviewed, and all of a sudden Fox goes split screen on the broadcast, and I couldn't catch the discussion. I caught some of it later on Twitter with reporters who were on scene who were able to film it on their phones. But you kind of see Stenhouse and Busch jawing, and Stenhouse basically saying that he didn't hit Busch, and Busch not believing him. And Stenhouse says something about go back and watch it again. And I've watched the replay a few times now. I couldn't quite make out what Busch said. I think he just said okay. And then right as he says that, he gets socked by Stenhouse's right fist, and all hell breaks loose. And so we're going to talk more about the fight than the race, because the All-Star race doesn't mean a hell of a lot. Matthew, what do you think?
Well, it's pretty old school, right? I mean, anytime you hit up North Wilkesboro and you talk about those types of tracks, you're looking for an old school feel. And NASCAR is getting back to that, which I like. I've read some people complaining that the All-Star race is at North Wilkesboro. I do not understand that at all. I think that this is a fantastic, maybe they don't need to have it there every year, but stuff like this is going to happen because, like you said, there's no tunnel. Once you're in the infield at a place like North Wilkesboro, the only thing that's there is the crossover gate. You can't get out, right?
Not during the race, no.
Not during the race, exactly. And, when Kyle Busch came in after the race, because Stenhouse Jr. had been there in the infield stewing all night, right? And he said, we all hit each other. And then Stenhouse said, you hit the fence, then you hit me. And then, like you said, Busch said, I don't believe it, but if that's what happened, okay. Go back and watch it, said Stenhouse. And then, boom, haymaker. And it's something that will keep people are like, fighting and whatever, but it's going to keep NASCAR at the front of conversations. It's at the front of our conversation here today, for goodness sakes.
Yeah,
people still talk about
it. Was so boring.
Well, Logano led 199 out of 200 laps.
That's correct. Yeah.
Right, and we're still talking about 1979 Daytona 500, right, and the fight after that. So, these types of things, they're going to happen. There's humans involved. There's emotions involved. There's $1 million on the line, right? So whether you want to argue that either one of those drivers was actually going to win the $1 million, but it's still two people who are at a high level of competition. So seeing the drivers of the number 47 and the number 8 go at it. And I read somewhere online that that Stenhouse Jr. needed 4 to 5 business days for his right hook to come in, right? Because it was a slow punch. And I thought to myself, well, it connected. That's all that matters, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I have a few thoughts on this, and we'll hash it out, you and I together. But first of all, a little more background too. Stenhouse did, when he was interviewed earlier in the race, did say something about holding my watch, which, for those who don't know, it's when guys get into a bar fight, they turn to a friend who doesn't want to take part and say, hold my watch, right? Because they don't want their watch to get broken or their whatever. They want to have it used against them in a fight. So he was already angry 2 hours approximately before the fight started. He obviously never cooled all the way down.
And with the watch, and with the watch thing, don't forget, years and years ago, it was actually Richard Childress. Kyle Busch had wrecked some of his cars in, I believe it was an Xfinity race, and someone saw Richard Childress taking his watch off and handing it to someone as he's going over to talk to Kyle Busch. Which I absolutely love. And then now that he's driving for Childress gave him a watch as a present at the beginning of his tenure at that.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was funny. Anyways, yes, go ahead.
No. You're good. I was just going to say that. So I've got really mixed feelings about this kind of fight. So, like, first of all, I'm generally not someone who thinks fighting is a great way to solve problems. I mean, we all kind of went through it in our youths. A lot of us maybe fought. I didn't personally fight much, but maybe we fought in high school or had a bar fight in your roaring 20s, that sort of thing. And I think, generally speaking, it's kind of stupid. I understand that emotions play into it, and people lose. Sometimes alcohol plays into it, and sometimes people, lose sight of what's really important because they're upset and angry in the moment. But I think it's kind of dumb. You don't want to risk an injury or a court date over something trivial, right? But it happens, especially when people are younger and before they mature a little bit. And the specifics of NASCAR, I have really mixed feelings because NASCAR is going to have a hard time. It's always wanted to shake that reputation as a Southern-only sport, as a red on the back of your neck. I don't know if we want to use the actual word, but I'm close enough there. Sport, good old boys and all that. And NASCAR has been trying for 30 years now to really shed that image as it grows. And I think a lot of times it has, but most of the drivers are still from the South. Most are still probably politically, culturally conservative. Most are probably still pretty openly Christian. We still have prayers before races, for better or for worse. I'm not saying Christianity is necessarily bad. I'm not saying being conservative is necessarily bad, as long as you're not like, there's a certain level of cultural areas where some people, like Kyle Larson, said a bad word a few years ago. That's what I'm trying to get at. I don't want to impugn anyone I don't want to say that everyone who's conservative is that way. So I don't want to get that mixed up. But there's a reputation where, NASCAR has this whole other fighting, and all the guys are from the South. And of course, it's not always true. Jeff Gordon's California, Joey Logano's Connecticut. There are guys from the Midwest who race. There are guys from New England and not just rural areas either. Joey Logano's from, I'm pretty sure Middletown, Connecticut is where he's from. And Connecticut is mostly an urban state. There are some rural pockets, sure, but it's mostly suburban and urban. So you can be a racer from anywhere. You don't have to be from Georgia or Alabama or whatever. But NASCAR, because it started in the South and because it didn't grow its race a lot in other parts of the country until more recently, it's still fighting that image, which is one reason why there is a Chicago street race, which we're also talking about in the podcast today as well, to get more viewers in a site in the area. It was not traditionally known as a NASCAR fan base. So what I'm getting at, and it's a long way of saying it, being a bit windy, but what I'm getting at is when there's a fight in NASCAR between two drivers, it can kind of be a bad look for a sport that's trying to look more professional and trying to shed the negative connotations and again, not every connotation of being a Southern sport is negative, but they're trying to shed some of those negative connotations. And I think that sets them back a little bit. Now, that being said, I was excited at first because it's entertaining. And I did send you a message, Matthew, saying, NASCAR fight. And then I kind of thought about it like, it actually makes the sport look sort of bad. And then speaking of the actual specifics of the fight, I have to go back and really watch the replays because Fox kept showing Busch hitting Stenhouse, and then they didn't really show a ton of replays of Stenhouse going through, not after the fight anyway. They did earlier, and I was in the middle of something, didn't quite catch them. I think I was making dinner. From what I saw, the initial situation with Stenhouse going in the middle. One replay looked like he hit, and one replay I think he looks like you can clearly tell he didn't hit. And the broadcast seemed to be of the consensus that he never hit Busch. So there's, Busch probably needed to check the spotter or something before he did what he did. And I think that's why Stenhouse was so angry, is because he's like, dude, I didn't touch you. Why are you so mad at me? But I also don't understand why Stenhouse threw the punch before giving Busch a chance to see the replay. He was so angry he didn't even think about it, right? And I understand, again, why he's angry. There's $1 million in the line, and even for a well-paid NASCAR driver, $1 million is a lot. And there's also the safety aspect. No one wants to get pushed into a wall at high speeds in a race car. I don't care how safe the cars are. It still doesn't feel good, I'm sure. And there's also just, you also end up being out of the race, and you sit for 2 hours and you stew. You don't have a chance to go do something else. So I think if Stenhouse had a chance to leave the track, maybe he'd be in a little bit better shape. But all that combined, I think, really led to an unfortunate incident.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, if he had, I think Stenhouse even addressed that. He was saying that if there was a tunnel, he'd probably been home watching the end of the race, right? But
yeah, I think he did say something about that. Yeah.
I'm still here. So but I think part of this, just with the intensity of everything and all the emotions running high and just the level of competition that we're seeing in these events, I think there's always going to be some tempers flaring. And if you're watching some of the replays, there was one guy, he had to have been the Jackman, because Jackman is always huge, right?
Mm-hmm. I do remember seeing him, yeah.
Right, and he was clearing house off of the hauler, right? People trying to get up onto the hauler because of course the teams got into it then, of course.
Sure, Ricky Stenhouse's father too.
Exactly, right? And this guy, man, someone should from WWE should look him up, because dude was clearing house off the back of that truck.
Yeah.
Once things started going. And is this going to spill over into the Coke 600 next week?
That's a good question. Yeah.
Right? Of course it is. What do you think is going to be one of the major highlights on TV being played on repeat leading up to the race? Right?
Yep.
Right? So...
yeah, I just wonder how it makes NASCAR look,
Yeah, and NASCAR says, well, I wonder, do you think there may be penalties out of this?
Maybe, and there's also the all publicity is good publicity thing, so maybe NASCAR isn't really exactly upset. They might think, oh, well, this falls into a negative stereotype, but also we got higher placement on SportsCenter, probably. I didn't see SportsCenter last night or
100%.
the other night, but probably. And then, also there are people we talking about during the Coke 600 as well.
Yep. Right, so actions detrimental. I'm not so sure that they're going to get dinged with anything. They might get a slap on the wrist or something like that. But there was one other aspect of the All-Star race that I really enjoyed, was that they had the yellow tires versus the red tires. And
right? Glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and so I thought that was pretty neat. The yellow primary tires, for anyone who's not up to speed on it, the yellow primary tires were, and what I mean by yellow is the Goodyear lettering on the side. When those were yellow, those were the primary tires, very similar to the ones they run every week. But this week, they also had a set of tires that they could use. They were given 4 sets of these, the teams were, and they were given 5 sets of the yellow primaries. And the red ones were a little bit of a softer compound. Mm-hmm. And it adds such a good... it adds in such a good, what would you call it, variable into the mix, that I'm really glad that they're trying this in the All-Star race, and I hope it makes it to some other tracks later on. If not this year, then in 2025. So
yeah, it's a little bit F1 style.
It is. And I know that might be a dirty word in some circles, but I think with some all right, but I think not for me. And with some long green flag runs, I think that I think that these types of differences would change the look of a race immensely, because if you have someone who's initially really fast on one of these red tires and then their performance falls off dramatically at the end of a long green flag run, and someone who's on yellows stays out, wins the race, this is a great way to get back to the tire wars without the danger, right? Because back in the day when we had 2 different tire manufacturers, it wasn't that great, because the tire companies were operating on the cutting edge and there were tire failures because the tires were so high tech for the time. This is a good way to get back to that without having the danger. There's always danger in NASCAR, but without having...
in any kind of race.
Exactly, but without having that, the tire companies working right on the knife's edge of whatever technology they're working with at the time. This is a good way to do it because both tires are exceedingly well developed. They're safe in terms of as much as they can be, safe on a racetrack, but it still adds another element to the race. So chalk me up as a fan to that experiment.
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to say one more thing on the fight before we talk briefly about Kyle Larson and the Coke 600, and then we'll wrap our segment. But so I'm not an anti-fighting person. Some people might say, "Oh, you don't like fighting, or what?" So no. Fighting has its place in the world, but generally I just don't like fighting for no good reason. I don't like the idea of fighting in high school, although people do it, and kids have emotion fighting over dating or whatever. And then same thing in bar fights in your 20s. Someone walks into somebody, someone's drunk, all of a sudden things turn into craziness. And I certainly saw that when I was younger. But if you want to go watch the way I look at fighting is if you want to watch a boxing match, you're paying for a boxing match, right? If you want to go watch boxing, go watch boxing. That's why I don't like fighting in hockey. Not because I'm a wimp. I mean, I don't like the fact that some guys end up getting concussed over it, but that's certainly true. But when I watch a hockey game, I'm watching hockey for shooting, passing, skating, checking to an extent. As long as it's clean and legal, I'm fine with it. But because if you didn't have any checking, it'd be probably a little bit too high scoring of a game to really be entertaining. But so you need to have some checking just to keep the defense in it. But again, I don't love hockey fighting too much just because it's a sideshow, and it takes away from the reason I like the game. It's entertaining, sure, and it kind of gets people fired up. And as a baseball fan, I also understand that when the bench is clear, it gets kind of fun and people talk about it, but it's not even it's not even part of the game. It's not even supposed to be part of the game, right? So it's a sideshow. And same thing with NASCAR fighting. It's like when two drivers, when Ricky Stenhouse is hitting Kurt Busch in the face, I almost said Kyle. See, I almost did it again. When he's hitting Kurt Busch in the face, it's like, okay, I understand that Stenhouse isn't thinking about the entertainment value. He's just pissed off, and that's it. He's mad, right? And that's all he's thinking about. I get it. But he wasn't thinking about long-term consequences, penalties, fines, how it makes the sport look. That's probably not in his back of his mind at all. I bet he didn't even plan on throwing that punch. I bet he was so angry as they were having the discussion, it just kind of happened. But, again, I think that when I tune into NASCAR, I don't want to see two drivers fighting. Sometimes it's kind of funny, like that one race a few weeks ago, I think it was in a junior series where a guy threw a piece of car parts at somebody who hit him. And I understand tempers flare, going really fast in race cars. It's dangerous when people are not driving cleanly. I totally get it. But I tune into any NASCAR race, not just the All-Star race, to see cars go really fast, to see drivers do things that I cannot do and probably could never do. I can drive pretty fast on a racetrack. I can't drive as fast as those guys, especially with 30 other people around me. So, especially in a car, it's difficult to drive. So that's what I'm tuning in for. I'm not tuning in for the fight after the race. And it's even a little bit of luck not luck. I don't know if it's luck is the right word, but normally I wouldn't even be watching the post-race that far, but I wanted to hear Logano's interview because he was so dominant, and I just hadn't decided to change the channel yet. So, it's these sideshows they're not really worth your time. That's where I come down on it. And like I said before, in the beginning, it's really entertaining. And when you think it through, it's more not a great look for the sport. So I wanted to just mention briefly, Kyle Larson's doing the double. I don't remember the last guy to do it. I know Robbie Gordon did it a lot back in the 90s and 2000s. I don't remember how many times he did it. With Kyle Larson, I don't want to predict anything for the race because Indy is all races are crapshoots, right? No matter, that's why I would never bet even $2 on a race, just because.
Isn't that the truth?
Because they're such a crapshoot, right? A dominant driver can be taken out by a crash or a mechanical failure so easily, but Indy especially, that track, for whatever reason, things go sideways. So that's a long way of saying that Larson qualified really well for Indy. I don't want to predict that it means anything because even if he drives really well, he could get caught up in something that's not his fault. But it's amazing to me to see someone that's relative. IndyCar to him is relatively new. And there are just some guys who could just drive anything. And Robbie Gordon was one of those guys. He could also drive off-road trucks. I remember him I believe he did Baja a few times.
That's right.
But, to see Kyle Larson hop out of a NASCAR and into IndyCar and go from the IndyCar back to a NASCAR, which in this case was slower. Now, there are times that NASCAR certain tracks, as we know, the super speedways, NASCAR gets relatively close in speed. They're like 220, 215, a little bit slower now with restrictor plates, I think, but they're over 200 at like Talladega, Daytona. Whereas Indy cars are 234, 235 in qualifying. It'll be a little bit slower in the race because there'll be other cars around. But that's amazing to me to go 234 in a qualifying session, hop on a plane, get a burrito bowl. He said someone prepped him a burrito bowl, land the plane. He didn't fly, but he landed, and then he flew in a plane. He wasn't flying the plane. Then you land, then you fly in a helicopter, and then you get into another car. Got to be exhausted. And then you're going slower, much different car handles differently, weighs more. I believe that NASCARs weigh more than Indy cars. It's just a whole different experience. And then I think I don't remember where he finished this week, but he did seem to do fairly well. And it's just got to be crazy to see how he's going to be doing 1,100 miles of that next week, assuming he finishes both races.
Agreed. And the qualifying speeds are just immense. I mean, Larson, like you said, was 232.8. 232.8, that's bonkers numbers. But the man can drive the wheels off anything, right? I mean, he's a NASCAR Cup Series champion, and he's won sports car racing, Rolex 24. He was part of that. He's won the Knoxville Nationals, dirt sprint cars, like another completely different genre of race. He's won dirt midgets, the Chili Bowl Nationals, right? I think when you come to think of it, these are all completely different genres of racing. It's just like, I mean, if you jump out of an Indy car and jump into NASCAR, it's like running it's like, I don't know, doing a foot race in sneakers and then doing a foot race in rubber boots full of tadpoles, right? It's a completely different type of event. Yes, you're still going immensely fast. There's still a huge amount of skill involved in both, but the approach to each car is so different. And the fact that the man can have so much success in all of these, I can't wait to see what happens next week with the Coke 600 in the Indy.
Me either.
I think it's going to be fantastic. And he's qualified fifth, man. Like you said, that's bonkers.
Yeah, that's crazy. I can't wait to watch. I'll be watching Indy for sure. I may have some holiday plans. I may have to watch the Coke 600 on delay. I'm not quite sure what my plans are. But I will be home for the Indy 500 in the morning. I'll probably watch the Thailand and Monaco before that as well. But that aside, I just want to say one more thing about Larson doing the double, and we'll wrap the segment for today. So the way I look at professional race car drivers, I've met a few, mostly names you wouldn't know, people who've competed at the professional level, but they weren't quite good enough to make, or maybe they were good enough, whatever reason, they didn't make NASCAR, they're not household names. I've also met a few household names. I met Juan Pablo Montoya and Elio Castroneves and Bobby Rahal at one point. So I've met a few professional guys whose names you'd recognize. But one thing about the pros, whether it's a pro that you work with at a driving school, who's just doing weekend warrior stuff and is not famous, or one of the best drivers of all time, one thing that separates the pros from automotive journalists, and there are a few automotive journalists who are good enough, but they're the minority, I think, unfortunately, just not enough. It's just a difficult skill. The pros can drive the wheels off almost anything. A professional NASCAR driver can hop into a Toyota Supra on a track or a Ford Mustang, a production car, and it doesn't really matter if it's front-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, big power, small power. It could be a Honda Civic Type R with front-wheel drive. It could be a Mustang with rear-wheel drive. It doesn't matter. They'll drive really well, especially if they know the track. If it's a track that's used for professional events, they've driven it in a race. I remember riding with pros in Acura RDXs or ZDX or MDXs, not ZDX, either RDX or ZDX in Road America at a relatively slow pace, and they were doing things that like, I didn't know you could do that in an RDX, right? But like the one thing about pros is they might be able to hop into any street car and drive the wheels out of it, but can they hop from series to series and race car type to race car type? I think on some level they probably can, the lower levels. I'm pretty sure a NASCAR driver could hop into maybe a lower powered sports car or something like that. But to hop into an Indy car and not just be competent, but be fast. It's one thing to hop into an Indy car and turn a quick lap and not crash and look good out there, and not struggle. It's another thing to qualify fifth for the Indy 500. And that's where I think Larson is setting himself apart. It's a bit like saying that a major league player can come to your beer league softball game and he'd kick butt. But not every major league player can play for some major league players are better than others, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some are not going to be good enough to help a team win the World Series. And I think it's the same thing with racing. All these pro drivers, all the 30 or 40 guys in NASCAR and the 30 or 40 guys in IndyCar and the 20 or 30 or 40, however many there are in F1, they could hop into just about any sports car and drive the wheels off it. But can they hop into another? They could probably hop into 80% of race cars and drive the wheels off it and do well. But can they hop into another high-level race car and succeed? Something that's the same level of competition. So can a NASCAR driver hop into an F1? Can an F1 driver hop into an IndyCar? And we've seen examples of success. There's too many to list. We know Mario Andretti is one of them. Juan Pablo Montoya has done well in multiple series. Other drivers, Shane Van Gisbergen, I'm going to say his name wrong. Van Gisbergen, thank you. Won in Chicago last year for being in Australia touring cars. So it is possible. I'm not saying it can't be done. Obviously, it has been done. But what I am saying is I'm not sure every single pro can do it. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe every one of those NASCAR drivers could go out and sit in an Indy car and qualify in the top 10 like Larson did. But to me, if you can go from one car to another, learn it that quickly, and do well in it, that separates you from your fellow professionals.
Absolutely, and that's something I can't even fathom. Being able to compete at that level for that sustained amount of time in a bunch of different series.
Yeah,
no, it's wild. It's so cool,
especially when it's in one day. And you have to fly from one place to another, even if it's a short flight, which I believe Indy to Charlotte is not exactly a lot of time in the air. But yeah, so speaking of the Coke 500, we will be back talking about that next week. That's one of NASCAR's crown jewel races. So that'll be an interesting topic of conversation especially coming off an all-star race that was outside of a fight, relatively boring. So with that, we'll wrap up the NASCAR segment here on the Truth About Cars podcast. eBay Motors is here for the ride with some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love. You transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive. It's all your own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, and exclusions apply. Once again, on the Truth About Cars podcast, I am Tim Healy, the managing editor, and we thank you for listening. This week we had Julie Giese, the president of the Chicago Street Race for NASCAR, on to talk about how the race will be in its second year here in Chicago. And we also had Truth About Cars contributor Matthew Guy coming by to talk about oil filter wrenches and what happened in the NASCAR All-Star Race at North Wilkesboro. I thank Julie and Matthew. I thank you for listening, and we thank eBay as well. Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next time.